Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. There's one word you used in the introduction that I really would like to talk about, which is rapid. Because I don't think people really fully understand. I've worked in the field now for, actually it's almost 40 years.
40 years?
40 years, yes.
So 40 years when there was no AI.
Well, we were working on it.
Working on it.
But the thing that surprises me and many of my colleagues working at the cutting edge of AI today is not the technology. I mean, the technology is like I imagined it was 40 years ago. Maybe indeed I had hoped we'd get here a bit quicker. But what really has surprised me is the rate at which the field is unfolding. I did the maths the other day. $1 billion is being spent on AI every day around the world. We have never seen that scale of investment in one technology ever before. I don't think it's hard to comprehend what is $1 billion a day, but to try and help you understand what that means, that's 20% of the world's R&D budget is being spent on one technology. Again, that's without precedent. I mean, the previous most expensive scientific journey was the Manhattan Project. And it's orders of magnitude more, even adjusting for inflation, than there was being spent on the Manhattan Project.
For our audience here, just take a moment for letting that sink in with what Mr. Walsh just told us. 20% of the world's budget today is spent on artificial intelligence. And Mr. Walsh has been in the field for the last 30, 40 years, researching, and now an expert. We have him with us, thrilled to have him with us on the stage today, Mr. Walsh. Where most of us, the only introduction to AI was possibly the Matrix or Terminator, you had practically envisioned yourself being here and having this conversation.
Well, yes, indeed. I mean, for most people, and indeed, that's why I'm here, was because as a young boy, I read those science fiction. I read, authors like Arthur C. Clarke and Isaac Asimov, and they painted a picture of a future where we had all these intelligent computers and robots that these intelligent computers were controlling. And I remember realizing back then as a young boy that that future was going to arrive, and we already had the tools, the computers, that were going to help us build that future. And so we should try and set about building that future. And that's what I started, with the goal of doing. My father, who's in his 90s, said to me the other day, he said, it was a remarkable press interview back then to think of that future. And I said, yes. He said, you were playing the long game though, weren't you?
No, but it's commendable, commendable. To tell our audience also, Mr. Walsh is coming fresh off France, the AI Safety Summit, which turned into this AI Action Summit. That's
right, yes. The UK held the first summit at Bletchley Park, where, of course, they cracked the German Enigma codes in the Second World War, and a follow-up summit hosted by France, and indeed co-hosted by India. The French, though, renamed the summit, and I think this is actually quite telling. It says something about the geopolitical direction that we're going, not just the scientific direction, but the direction the field is going in. It was renamed from a safety summit, which was exclusively focused on how we regulate, how we deal with the challenges the technology throws up, to the French called it President Macron, obviously, he's an action man, so he called it the Action Summit. And you did see a real shift in perspective there that indeed it was epitomized by Vice President Vance's speech, where it was really, let's not regulate, this is an all-out race for technological economic dominance. A race that was, of course, at the time made even more poignant by the announcement from China of DeepSeek, their state-of-the-art model that had really shocked many people, especially people in the US, that China was a major player, was competitive despite the tech restrictions. But what I think is interesting is also to look at how that conversation now is going to shift, because India is hosting the next summit.
You know, that's really interesting because with what you say, where our Prime Minister is concerned, AI is right on top of our priority list right now. And there is a conversation that we are also having on how, to regulate without stifling innovation. And there's also this race that you see, which you've just touched on, where, of course, America is doing really well, China is doing it cheaper by the dozen, and then there are other countries which seemingly might, fall on the wayside of this AI race. And India is looking at that keenly. We'd like to develop rather than just watch.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised. I had the privilege and pleasure to have a meeting with Prime Minister Modi.
Oh, really? How did that go?
Well, it's one of the more unexpected afternoons of my life when he came to visit Australia and I had the pleasure to meet him, and he spent half an hour asking me questions. And what really impressed me, I'm amongst friends here, I think, and just between you and me,
We're just going live, that's it.
Okay, and the live audience, I talked to him for 30 minutes. He didn't have any notes, and he asked good questions for 30 minutes.
Because like I pointed out, AI is right on the top of India's priority list. And you see this race, we're hoping to get there. But would you want to delve a little on the countries that are really not where they should be in the race where AI is concerned, because the kind of money that's being invested, the kind of technology that's needed?
Yeah, well, I mean, you put your finger on, I think, what worries people, or perhaps worries people here in India, which is if you're being outspent by what's happening in the US, where most of that $1 billion is being spent in the US. Not all of it, but a large chunk of it's being spent in the US. A lot of it's being spent by China, and those are the two leading nations, and very much neck and neck today. And there are, but what's interesting, and what you should take away from the Chinese DeepSeek model is not that, China is going to win this race and what consequences that's going to have to the balance of power in the world, but that China did it with much less money, only a few $1 million, and they did it despite the fact that the US had put trade restrictions on the latest GPUs, the latest computer hardware that you need to run some of this. So the fact that China could do that, despite these limitations, less money, less compute, tells you that India can do it. Tells you that where I live, Australia can do it. Tells you that it's not just the people with the deepest pocket. This is a technology. It's often compared to electricity. And actually, that's quite a good analogy, because the world benefits from electricity.
True.
It wasn't just Edison and the followers of Edison who got to have the profit of electricity. Electricity is everywhere in India, it's everywhere in Africa, it's everywhere in the world. Everywhere you go, electricity is powering so many things and also driving the data. And so AI is going to be the same. You're going to see, some people take a little bit of a first mover advantage, like Google has taken a bit of an advantage in the internet world.
But it's just the beginning.
But that's just the beginning. And in the long term, it is a technology. It's a technology that we know works very well in distributed fashion, because intelligence is already distributed. There's 8 billion intelligences around the world, and they coordinate and cooperate and compete. But that actually is quite a good way to break things down. And AI will be the same. It won't be the one super-duper Google intelligence or the one super-duper DeepSeek intelligence that wins. We'll all have our own individual AI. We'll run on our smartphone, run on our computers. And that's actually quite a good way to spread the power, spread the benefits, protect your privacy and all those other things.
No, India is quite keen on that, because we completely do understand that AI is the new geopolitical weapon, and we must, be on that bandwagon. But I'll draw you back.
And let me say one other thing about India before we move on, which is that India, if it plays its cards right, could do very well. So, whilst everyone is going to benefit from AI, certain people will benefit more, from electricity. We know that Siemens and Westinghouse perhaps did a bit better than a few other people. Well, India potentially has the raw materials to do really well in AI. And the two most important raw materials are people, it's the brain power of the people building it, and data. All of this is being driven by what we can learn from the data. Well, India's got 1 billion something people. That's a huge amount of data. So you have, if you plan it well, you have the raw ingredients to do quite well.
Let me draw you back. How often do you get the question in the future, will AI be limited to agents or master? The ethics of AI. How many talks have you delivered on that? It's a concern.
It is, and indeed, actually, I think people are more concerned about it today than they were even 3 or 4 years ago. Almost every conversation I have now, people say, well, if the machine's taking over, should I be worried?
Should we be worried? And how worried should we be?
I don't think you need to be too worried today about the machines taking over. I think you should be worried about humans behaving badly, whether that be presidents of countries on the other side of the world, that humans will use these tools to amplify the harm they do. But at the moment, machines do exactly what we tell them to do. That's all they ever do. Now, sometimes we haven't thought carefully enough about what we tell them to do, and anyone who's programmed a computer knows it's incredibly, frustratingly, literally minded. It does exactly what we tell it to do, even if that is quite harmful. But computers don't have any initiative of their own. They don't have any free will of their own. In that sense, you don't have to worry about the Terminator. But you do have to worry that people are going to use the technologies. Humans are going to direct the technologies in ways that could be harmful. Mm-hmm. And we had the 3 chiefs on this morning, and that's one thing that does worry me. I've had the privilege to speak at the United Nations half a dozen times about how AI is changing completely the character of war. You only have to look at vision coming back from the Ukraine to see that war is being transformed by artificial intelligence. You only have to look at what was happening, the tragedy unfolding in Gaza, to see again where AI is making the decisions as to where the IDF was intervening. Again, AI is completely changing the character and nature of war, to think that this is something that isn't going to be necessarily purely a good, and that we're going to have to be careful and mindful. And to think about it, because let's not forget, there are many technologies that we have regulated as a planet. We've regulated nuclear weapons, we've regulated chemical weapons, biological weapons, cluster munitions, blinding lasers. Actually, when you come down to it, you add it all up, there's quite a bit of technology we've thought about. Well, that is actually morally repugnant. That's going to be distasteful. We already actually have good enough ways. We have F-35 fighters, we have, howitzers and lots of ways of defending ourselves and protecting. And do we really need to use this newest technology in ways that are going to look like a bad Hollywood movie?
But, Mr. Walsh, with what you've said, I gather that there is no real current threat that an agent is going to turn into a master anytime soon. But then? Not
a current threat. I think actually we're going to be our own worst enemies. That we will enslave ourselves because we'll dumb ourselves down. We saw this, I've always said social media should have been a wake-up call. A wake-up call to when we hand over, our attention to machines, that we're our own worst enemies. It's us that are addicted to our smartphones. It's not, the machines are designed to be addictive, I have to admit. But, we're easily drawn in, we're easily seduced. It's our own human failings that get us there. And I do worry that we're going to supercharge that with AI. And if we're not careful, we'll wake up and we realize that we've dumbed ourselves down. We've handed over so many of the things that we do to the machines. And it's not that the machines have taken over, but we've given them the right to do that. And that if we no longer write business letters, because ChatGPT always writes our business letters, if we no longer write our speeches, because ChatGPT writes our speeches, well, maybe we lose the ability to communicate.
But Mr. Walsh, when you read about very disconcerting events like the chatbot Gemini of Google actually telling a student to go kill himself, or he needs to die, or and tell me if it's true, because some of us were really worried, and then we thought it was just we were maybe overreacting. Where when this word came in that there were two AI agents who were speaking with each other, and then they realized that they are AI, and then they switched to a different language, which is AI language. Did it happen?
It did, yes, it did.
Now that's disconcerting. Now I would think that's machines taking over.
No, a friend of mine actually was behind this experiment.
Could you explain?
It was reported in a way that was much more sensational than what happened. So they were building some agents, some AI agents that could learn to trade. So I want 2 bags of sugar and I want a bag of flour, and they got the AI agents to trade with each other. And to begin with, there was a human in the loop, so the agents were speaking in English. But when the human got out of the loop, the agents worked out, well, English is quite inefficient. I could say, 1X and 3 R's. And it worked out X stood for sugar and R stand for flour, that was much more efficient. And so it wasn't being intentionally, malevolent in any way at all. Just realized that English is pretty inefficient. Computer speak is much quicker and so much easier, much more precise, much less ambiguous. There were lots of reasons why that made sense.
But that does, leave room for being malevolent.
Yes, it does. It does. And so human oversight is always going to be really important, especially where the applications have significance, a high stake. But I mean, the other thing, and to talk about chatbots, encouraging people to commit suicide, that has really happened. People, as far as we know, have been encouraged. But again, I look at social media and say, we didn't learn the lesson. We're running this big experiment on humanity, especially our young people, which is having, as if you look at the statistics in most countries, anxiety levels amongst young people are going through the roof. Mental health issues are going through the roof, coinciding with the introduction of social media. Now, it's very hard to know where the correlation is causation, but one has to start suspecting strongly that, like the experiment we ran with tobacco, this is not proving to be a good thing. And why is it that we let the technology companies put these tools out in the public sphere without running the tests and the safeguards? If I said to you that there was a drug company and it was testing its product on the general public, it didn't have any regulatory oversight, people were dying, you'd say, no, surely that's outrageous. And I'd say, no, of course, that doesn't happen. Drug companies are carefully and appropriately regulated. They have to run trials, they have to produce evidence to show that their products are not going to harm people. And that's with their physical health. But somehow we forget for people's mental health that it's just as important. And social media and now AI is running a big experiment on humanity. And I don't think we're putting in the appropriate oversight to ensure that there'll be some good things with it. These tools are very helpful for people exploring issues, people who are having issues around addressing their sexuality.
Fair point. So one needs to have that bit of regulation while not to stifle innovation. You need to walk that thin line.
We do, but I think it's a bit of a myth that the tech companies have helped perpetuate that regulation necessarily stifles innovation. And indeed, there's actually quite a good argument that regulation will prevent innovation from being stifled. That we saw this, for example, with genetically modified foods. The public was not really brought along with the idea, it was not felt that it was being appropriately regulated, and now in many countries I go to, people talk about frankenfoods and that we won't get the benefits, the climate resistance, the disease resistance that we need from genetically modified, forgetting, of course, that the last 2,000 years of agriculture have been slowly genetically modifying food.
Mr. Walsh, I would like to talk a bit more about this, and we're going to take that off stage. But I want to quickly come. One of the books, of the 4 books that Mr. Walsh has written, he's actually set a date, 2062. And it's very disconcerting and scary because he seems to suggest by 2062, AI is going to be as efficient as humans. Now,
Yes.
does that mean that AI will develop a conscience? There'll be, what do you mean by that?
So I should say, this wasn't just my prediction. I surveyed 300 colleagues around the world, other experts in AI. That was their average prediction, 2062. Some of them said it was going to be quicker. Some of them said it was going to be slower, but the average was 2062, which is...
Will they develop true creativity? Will they general intelligence, consciousness? What are we talking about?
So the question I asked them was, when would computers match humans in all of their cognitive, intellectual abilities? Whether they could do all the things that we do that require intelligence. I think it would be conceited to think that they wouldn't necessarily be creative. Whether they be conscious, now that I think is one of the most interesting, open scientific questions of the century, because we know so little about consciousness. I can summarize the scientific knowledge of consciousness. It happens in the brain, somewhere towards the base of the brain. That's it. That's about what science knows about what is actually the most profound human experience. When you woke up this morning, you opened your eyes, you didn't say, oh, I'm intelligent. You said, I'm awake, I'm conscious again. That experience of being alive, which is the rich thing that we all enjoy and is something that we know so little about. And what will happen by 2062 is, will we have an answer to the question, is that something that's limited to biology, or is that something that could be recreated in silicon? Mm-hmm. We have no idea today what the answer to that question is. They might be conscious, or they might be zombie intelligence, intelligent but without the consciousness that goes with it. Consciousness and intelligence in the animal world seem to be very connected. All the things that are intelligent.
Do you see AI to be a threat to humanity in the long run?
No, I see humanity being a threat to humanity. Much greater threat.
Tell me something then, because reaching the end of the session, for someone who studied AI for so long, what is that one thing that you feel is not right about the way with which AI is developing?
I think the one thing that's wrong is that it shouldn't be in the hands of me or my colleagues. It should be in the hands of everyone. It's a technology that's going to touch all of our lives, and it shouldn't be up to people, many of them in Silicon Valley, many of them white male people with their own agendas, who are making those fundamental decisions about what is the future, what is 2060 going to be like, what is the world our children are going to be inherited. It's not the choice of them, it should be the choice of all of us.
We're also living in a geopolitical world where AI has become, like I said, a possible weapon. Which field do you think that where we stand today could be most harmed by if, that line blurs between an agent and a master?
I do worry about 2 things. One is the way that when we touched upon this a little bit, the way that we may transform warfare. And the other thing that I really worry about, because it is a very delicate thing and a very important thing, is our democracy. I'm here in the world's largest democracy.
Yes.
And I do worry that AI will be a tool that will supercharge misinformation, disinformation, will be used to polarize us. We've seen, I think, just unfortunately, a taste of what that can happen with social media. And now we're going to add to that. So with social media, we can reach very clearly, very cheaply into people's lives. And now we're going to be able to put AI into that, personalize, and put really persuasive content that will, I fear, not bring us together, but drive us apart. And democracies seem to be quite delicate at the moment, not just in this country, but in most democracies. Democracy, the democracy index is actually going down. The number of functioning democracies, which does not actually apparently include the United States, according to the democracy index, is going down, which is a worrying trend. For many years, from the start of the last century, the number of democracies was increasing. We were becoming a more democratic world, a more representative world. That seemed to me a good trend to go. Unfortunately, we're going backwards. And I do worry about how technologies, social media, AI, are providing the tools to help bad people make those changes.
You know what I'm going to do is I'm going to open the floor. Our vice chairperson wants to ask you a question, Ms. Kalipuri.
Hello. Hi. I just want to go back to an earlier question that Preeti asked you about two AI agents realizing they're talking to each other and switching from English to a more efficient language, which is, their own language. What I want to ask you is, in that experiment, did the AI agents realize that it's more efficient, or did the humans who were running the experiment say to the AI agents, hey, it's more efficient, switch? Which way was it? And were the people carrying on the experiment expecting this to happen?
Good questions. The way it happened was they gave the AIs the goal of, as quickly and as efficiently as possible, agree a deal, an exchange of goods with each other. And so the AIs worked out, well, it was quicker and more efficient if we stopped speaking English and start speaking our own language, in that sense. Now, when it was reported in the press, people said, oh, the scientists switched it off in horror. That wasn't the case. My friend said, we switched it off because it wasn't what we were trying to achieve. We weren't very interested in what they were doing. We couldn't really, they did retrospectively debug what the messages were, but they said it wasn't that we were frightened of the machines going off and making other plans. They were still sticking to the goals. Again, computers do what we tell them to do. They were still just trying to exchange goods with each other. They were just doing it in a more efficient way because they discovered that English was an efficient way to do it.
And your friend wasn't horrified with that, because that sounds quite horrifying to us.
She was horrified with the way it was reported, the way that it's turned into
Mr. Walsh, you've been
a conspiracy theory.
You've been researching AI too long to be this casual about this.
But it highlights a point, which is that we do live in a world in which conspiracy theories and rumors get easily amplified.
By AI as well.
Yes, and therefore I have great respect for the important role that the Fourth Estate, journalism, magazines like India Today play in filtering and finding out what is true and what is not quite true, to help us understand what are the real challenges that face society today and what are the things that we don't have to worry about.
We've reached the end of the session, but I'm going to just ask you one quick question, because you're coming off France, and where they changed the AI Safety Summit to the AI Action Summit. And India is going to host the next AI Action Summit. Should we change it back to the AI Safety Summit? Is the question that I asked.
No, I think you should change it to the AI for Good, AI for Society, AI for All Summit, so that all of us, not just the rich white people in Silicon Valley.
You're a very philanthropist way of looking at AI.
No.
But I appreciate you joining us. So, ladies and gentlemen, please raise a warm, warm applause for Mr. Walsh. He should be back with us when India hosts the AI Safety Summit. We're going to have him back. Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.